President Biden is calling Jerome Powell into his office, the principal's office, for a meeting today. We have some context that we can provide here via a quote. President Joe Biden will hold a rare Oval Office meeting on Tuesday with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell amid the highest inflation in decades, which has angered Americans and hurt his standing with voters. The two will discuss the state of the American and global economy, according to a White House statement. It's the first meeting between the two since Biden in November announced his intention to nominate Powell for a second term at the helm of the U.S. Central Bank, according to a record of the Fed chief's public schedule, which is available through March. So why is he doing this? Well, it's pretty obvious. Inflation is really bad in this country. If you look at what's happening just from a wage standpoint, wages have gone up, but they have not outpaced inflation. And inflation actually gave the average worker a 2.4% pay cut last year. And if you look at this in the context of global inflation rates, the U.S. ain't doing so hot. Australia's at 5.1%, Norway 5.4%, Sweden 6.4%, all the way Denmark, Canada, Eurozone. The U.S. is at 8.3%, just slightly below the U.K. And then we have the price index here year over year. We have now just seen the first tick down right there on the bottom right since November 20. But if you look at the actual price index, we are at the highest level since 1982. We've seen 16 consecutive increases in the inflation rate. The inflation, again, is really bad. And if you look at this for a bunch of different things like gas prices, look at gas prices. The national average for gas prices per gallon is up towards $4.50 per gallon. We haven't seen these numbers in a long time. Actually, never. California's record high gas prices today, $6.62 from Scott Budman. A year ago, that price was $4.16. And in some places, gas has now gone over $7, closing at $7.30 per gallon. Food at home is just as bad. And we've also seen house appreciation, home price appreciation versus inflation, massively outpace it. Look at this, 130% over inflation. That is numbers that we have never even seen close to, right? We got close to those numbers somewhat, I guess, 99% in the 2008 housing crisis. And then if you look at this, we're up over 130% now compared to inflation rates from a house appreciation standpoint. So the economy has gone bananas. People are out of control. Food is more expensive. Gas is more expensive. Housing is more expensive. All of these things around you are more expensive. So even with wages up slightly over the last few years, it's not outpacing inflation. It's gotten really bad. And why is President Biden doing this? You have to think about the incentives, right? Midterm elections are coming up. It's obviously not good for a sitting U.S. president to have the highest inflation that we've seen in 40 plus years. And if you think about this in context of what could happen, he's calling him in to determine what will happen next, right? They're trying to figure out what exactly to do. So I think that there's a bunch of different things to be discussed here. I'm sure that this will be a somewhat contentious meeting. I don't think that anyone is arguing that they are doing the right thing to some instance. They're put in an extremely difficult position now with COVID and now getting themselves out of that. We have high inflation, and now most people believe that we are going into a slowing or shrinking economy and a recession. So Jerome Powell, President Biden, they're both in difficult positions. They're calling a meeting to discuss this. This doesn't happen very often, but I think that there will probably be some blame cast or some decisions to be made around what will happen next. What is your takeaway from this, John?
I love that quote, call him into the principal's office. That's essentially what's happening here, right? Inflation is here. They can't hide it anymore. It's across the board on almost everything you buy, food at home, food away from home, shelter, literally anything that you do. It's more expensive now than it has been in the past. I think that Jerome Powell is being called in to Biden's office, essentially saying, hey, what the hell is going on? What are we going to do to fix this? And then this is going to be a caveat. Like, do they do what they say they're going to do? And what they say they're going to do, does it work, right? So do we get to that point where it's, hey, look, we're going to raise rates. Okay, does raising rates work, or are we going to still tank the economy? I think it's kind of just an overview. But yeah, you went through all the inflation numbers, 8.3% inflation. We're one of the worst in the world, to be honest, at this point. We're definitely like bottom 50, bottom 10 in the world, inflation. Europe just had really high inflation numbers come out as well, but everything across the board is expensive. Gas, which is, I believe, what most Americans are probably thinking about as summer coming up, trips are coming up, $7 a gallon some places, $6.62 in California. That's insane. It was $4 last year.
Yeah, I think that what we need to avoid, though, is placing all the blame on specific individuals. Mm-hmm. Obviously, these are the figureheads. In most cases, they're either elected or not elected, depending on who we're talking about in this situation. But ultimately, it's impossible to tell what would have been different if someone else is in there. The last two administrations have printed a bunch of money. That's just a fact, right? Yeah. And they've injected a bunch of money into the global economy. And what we see now is this massive influx of inflation. At the end of the day, though, what I think is important to remember is everyone just needs to look out for themselves. Like, we've talked about on the show for a long time, many other people outside of mainstream media, we saw them spin the narrative for a long time that it was non-existent, it was transitory, then it was good for you, right? And there have been many people here on this show, elsewhere, that have talked about inflation for a long time now, for over 12 months, and said that not only is it coming, but it's going to be really bad, levels that we haven't seen in decades. And that's literally exactly what happened. So people can look at Bitcoin today and say, oh, it's not an inflation hedge. That's not true, right? Bitcoin is up nearly 400% since the pandemic started. And ultimately what it did was it front ran inflation. It saw all this money printing going on. It saw asset prices starting to increase. It knew that this was going to happen, all the investors that were buying Bitcoin. And that's exactly what happened. It was up nearly 400%. It was $3,500, $4,000, under $4,000 when we started the pandemic. And now we're sitting here at $30,000. So it performed well in my expectations to that. I think now we're trading in this range, right? Because it's become a risk asset closely correlated with equities. We'll see what happens over time. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin aside, everything else aside, like everyone needs to just look out for themselves, because now you're in the position where maybe you got a 3% raise, maybe you got a 5% raise, which would have been considered net positive in another year, is now you're underwater and you're making less money than last year relative to the goods and services that you purchase every single year. So I think ultimately, again, take care of yourself, take care of your family, make sure you're educated about these things, get invested, make sure you can participate in the price increase in assets. So if what happens a year ago or 2 years ago happens again, you're able to see that increase in prices, because at the end of the day, inflation is the silent killer. It's a tax on everyone, and it can put you in a really bad financial position if you're not prepared to benefit from it from an asset appreciation standpoint.